Ramone. Hey, congratulations on your new film, the short film, Virgin.
Thank you very much, Gig, and I really appreciate you having me on over here. And it was a very good screening at Cinequest.
I know it was showcased at Cinequest, one of the most prestigious film festivals around the world. I mean, how do you feel about that, and how was that reception?
So the reception was great. First of all, I mean, I'm very grateful to Cinequest for having me back with this movie. We played in a block called The Mind Benders, which was on Sunday, the 16th of March at 9:45. It was a great block. A lot of other fantastic films and filmmakers were there. The crowd was popping, ready to go on a Sunday evening. So, and we had a great screening. We finished off the block with our movie, which is a little bit of a big bang way of going out, considering the subject matter and the tone of the movie. So yeah, we had a great screening over there. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you more about what the movie's about to give it some context as well.
Yeah, well, let's always start with that obligatory question, where the original idea came from for Virgin.
Sure, yes. So now, since Version is a horror movie about the birth of Jesus Christ, it's the nativity story told as a haunted house movie. And it's all in Aramaic, which is the language that would have been spoken at the time. Uh, so where the idea came from is when I was growing up in India. I grew up in a multi-religion household, and half my family is Hindu and half the family is Christian. So I went to a Catholic school, and in the school they asked me, "What religion are you?" I said, "To be honest, no idea." So I went back home, asked my mom, and she explained the whole dynamics of the family. But she said, we're primarily Hindu, but there's a lot of Catholic and Christian influence in our family from your dad's side. So I went back to the school and I asked the teacher, okay, if I'm Hindu, what happens? They said, oh, if you're Hindu, then on Fridays you get to go play with the Muslims and the other religious kids over there. And I said, and if I'm Christian, they said, well, you have to go up to that chapel and kneel for about 2 hours and pray. I said, oh, okay, I'm a Hindu today. I'll go and play. So growing up, I always had that question as to what is faith and what does that mean? And how since went to Catholic school, I was told many of the stories from the Bible, and it always struck me as, of course, I saw the moral and I saw how it affects people, but I also felt like they were very horrific, and some of them were scary, and especially all the Old Testament stuff. So I always felt like it was a great book of horror stories in a way too. And I feel like that idea that of Mary and Joseph being all alone in this barn and this with this manger while being sequestered and also being given the responsibility of birthing one of the most important figures in history would have been a scary ordeal, especially with the things at the time, like God versus evil, and how does how does that play into this? So I wanted to mix that mythology and put it into a modern day, the no, sorry, not modern day, but a modern genre, which is the haunted house movie.
Now, what is your personal love with the horror itself?
So I grew up with my dad. I'd be watching stuff that he would be watching that I was technically not supposed to be watching. Like I walked in once and I saw he was watching some movie with a man getting his hand sawed off with a chainsaw, and I said, "Oh, what is this?" And he said, "Oh, it's a movie called Scarface." And I said, "Who's that guy?" "Oh, that's Al Pacino." And then I saw the original Django with Franco Nero with a guy dragging a coffin around. All this around like age 6 and 7. And I would just sit there, sometimes eyes closed, sometimes open, but watching stuff I really shouldn't be watching. And my mom would always come and totally be very, very upset with my dad for even allowing me anywhere close to this. So I think that's where the original love for it came from. And my dad, because he's a big cinephile, I feel like he's like my Pauline Kael. He showed me the ropes, so to speak, on what stuff to like, what stuff that's not good. Charles Bronson, the Marx Brothers, but I feel like I always kept gravitating towards the horror stuff within these films. So I think that's where the love for it came from. Plus, as a kid, you're getting told bedtime stories by your, mom, grandmother, my father, and all of them are like the creepiest version of Red Riding Hood, the creepiest Hansel and Gretel. And then, of course, I was also being told like stories from India, the Indian mythology and the Indian ghosts and spirits. And I feel all that has played a part into kind of building my love for the genre.
Of course, the your film touches a biblical matter. In its own way, you use creative liberties, but because of the fact that there are some people who are fairly religious and think that this could be sacrilege. How do you find that balance? With fictional and religious themes into your film.
So the idea was to first ground the film in some reality. So that's why the Aramaic comes from. We almost wanted to make sure, like, how would the human beings in the story feel at this time? Like, how would Joseph feel if the woman he loves, the woman who's his fiance, comes and tells him that she's pregnant with God's child? How do you know that? So he himself would, him being a pious man would be okay. But then the moment it's the woman he loves, that becomes something else. So that doubt, I mean, we wanted that doubt to creep in. So that's where the whole idea of trying to understand what faith means to a person and how do you, the theme of the movie is how do you, without proof, how do you know that true love exists? And you can't. It's purely faith. And we wanted to walk that fine line between we didn't want to go to be blasphemous, but we wanted to be like there should be a question. We don't want to give answers. It's more just asking questions over here. And but at the same time, we wanted to be respectful to the people. We almost want to take it to the point of where it might be deemed like disrespectful, but then there is a redeeming quality by the end of it that, like I don't know if we should get into the whole spoilers thing, but there is definitely a redeeming quality. And as ridiculous as this sounds, it is an uplifting film.
Now, your decision to use the language of Aramaic,
Yes.
um, tell us how you actually pulled that off with the language that was spoken 2,000 years ago, and the decision to make it into this film.
Yes. So we basically had there's very few people in the world who speak this particular dialect of Aramaic. Aramaic is spoken, but in various dialects. But there's this particular dialect of that time. So I found a professor who used to be a UCLA professor who was an expert in Aramaic, especially of that dialect. And now he lives in some old age home in Washington, D.C. And I called him up and I said, Professor, my name is Ramone Menon. I would like for you to translate this script that I'm making about Jesus Christ's birth in Aramaic. Can you help me? And he said, Hello. And I realized, okay, if we want to make this movie, we better hurry up. So I called up my co-producer. I said, we need to make this movie now, although I don't think this movie is going to be made. So that's how we broke up the script into various lines, and we had the line reading, and then we had like a one where the pronunciations were given. And luckily, our lead actress, Jessica Demouni, who is fantastic, she already spoke a little bit of Arabic. So there's a lot of similarities with certain words between Aramaic and Arabic. So that helped. But so with her accent and the authenticity of that. And same thing with our actor Herman Gambir. They were able to learn it. But we just like for instance, at the end of the movie, I had a one-page monologue for Joseph originally. And when I heard the way the language was being broken up, I said, you know what? Let's do it with a look. Maybe a look will be the fine. Just cut the monologue. So it was definitely it is a process, but I have to give hats off to Jessica and Herman. They learned it very quickly. And also it lends that you're doing a horror movie as well because you can minimize the dialogue too. So you
Mhm.
want it to be as visual as possible, but you also want the key moments to be said with the language. So that helped. That balance of making a very visual horror movie and still keeping it authentic sounding was very helpful for us from the genre point of view.
Not to mention the translation that scrolls on the screen.
Yes. Yeah, that is the other thing. Like the way I kept describing this movie when we were either supposed to be making a horror movie about cryptocurrency or a Jesus Christ horror movie. And my crew was all like, "Can we just do the cryptocurrency horror movie because we don't want to, delve into this very controversial subject matter." I said, all the more reason we should, because it's a movie about like something that we all can feel, like what is faith, what do we believe? And so I felt with the subtitling, the way I was going around selling it to everybody on my crew, at least, I said, I want to make the death metal album version of the Nativity story. And that meant to me like a comic book style also, like very graphic and very poppy, but still it's almost when you look like at a manga, there's
Mhm.
like stuff that pops up randomly, like whether it's a sound or whether it's the dialogue. That's how I wanted the subtitles to feel, but yet in a biblical aesthetic and a horror aesthetic.
Now, with the casting itself, was the the Arabic language part of the requirement for the casting, and did you bring in the professor himself to listen to the language again?
So because we had there wasn't a requirement, but I just knew it from a casting point of view, but I knew from in the back of my head like that's something I should be thinking about. Because I felt like if you had the look and you had the acting chops, that's the most important thing. We can learn the language. I was willing to give the actors the time by even pushing the shoot for them to get it because I feel like horror acting is very difficult in general. So you really want somebody who can sell it because, how do you react to something that you've never experienced, right? Like a ghost is standing there outside the window and you're like, okay, how do I play that, right? So you need a different kind of acting chops, I feel. Like it's a very difficult style of acting. So we never really had that as a requirement, but this became like an additional thing. It's just that when Jessica came to me and she said, "Oh, I also speak," she was very interested in the idea. And then when she said that she spoke Arabic, I said, "Can you do your audition in Arabic? I just want to hear how that sounds." And it was fantastic. She just absolutely blew me away with the audition. I knew immediately like this will make it work. We'll give her the time that she needs to learn the Aramaic. And the professor, because of the limited time, we couldn't get him to come in to check. But we had all the recordings of the dialogue. So we could basically make sure that that's exactly the sound, even the accent. Because we had the line reading and then we had the accent breakdown of the same line that he recorded. So that's how we were able to kind of make sure that we were able to blend both and kind of make sure that it is authentic to that dialect and to that accent.
So overall, what was your casting process that you landed these two actors? What qualities that they shown you that you said they they need to be in this film?
Yes, with Herman, the guy who plays Joseph, for him, we wanted somebody who looked very empathetic, somebody who you could tell is a good man at heart, but there is an edge to him. There is a wild edge. It's almost like the best way of putting it was if you see the old John Ford westerns, there was the John Ford western, which was very technicolor and nice and great. And that's how when we look at Roman paintings, that's how the Bible's portrayed, nice and clean and neat. But I wanted to do the Sergio Leone version of that. So I wanted the rough, like Lee Van Cleef, Eli Wallach approach to the Bible. And that's how when I saw Herman's face, I was like, there is an edge to this, and I can feel that there would be a transformation. So I feel like that's how the casting process was, because it was literally an open casting call. We tried to get, I wanted to see as many people as possible for it, But when it's actually because Herman was he had actually reached out to me about a previous movie that we did called My Scary Indian Wedding.
Mhm.
And for some reason he couldn't do the film. I forgot the reason why. But when we were casting this movie and I was going through the process, I remembered him and I said, "Hey, maybe he'd be great for this." So when I told him about it, he was all into it, and we did some rehearsals, and he was able to show that he could play both this vulnerable side and this maniacal side, and do a very smooth, believable transition in from one to the other. And with Jessica, I needed someone who I believed has the faith and an undying faith, unquestionable faith. And even in the face of the biggest adversity, whether that's psychological trauma, physical trauma, it need like there had to be a conviction in her eyes. And I felt seeing her face, like she definitely has very strong and a determined look that I felt was super important for the casting of the Miriam character. So that's how choosing them came down to those qualities first. Because, I at one point I even decided if I could possibly just remove all dialogue from the movie if I had to.
Mhm.
I was ready to do that and just do it all purely visual. But luckily, they're both such great actors. I didn't need to do that.
Well, you certainly pulled it off, and especially the fact that you transported the audience, 2,000 years ago with that set decoration and the costumes. Can you address that? Especially it was such a high quality setup for a short film.
Yes, it comes down to reverse engineering, really. Like we were like, okay, if we don't find a barn that can be dressed up to do this, we can make the movie because we don't have the budget, financing, nothing to build a set. So we had to find a barn, which was a process, and we found an old barn like outside in Lancaster. That's about 45 minutes outside of LA. And it was used for like various like it was used it just housed just do farm stuff, but it had been in like some other like smaller movies and stuff, so we were able to take that, but it definitely didn't look totally period. Like this could have been, it could have looked like from Friday the 13th or something. But our production designers and prop masters, Sydney Cost, I mean, sorry, Allison Cost and Sydney Horton, they come as a team. They worked with me before. I knew if anybody could pull it off, it would be those two. And I said, guys, this is the barn. Can we do this? And they looked around and they were not unfazed at all. They seemed, yeah, yeah, totally. We could do it. I'm giving them the budget of a monthly cell phone bill and they managed to pull it off. And the best thing was we said, for anything that we see the seams, let's Blade Runner this. Fog, just put a whole bunch of fog, rain. We didn't have rain because we just didn't have the money to do it, but we would have if we could. But we did the fog to cover up everything that wouldn't have been period appropriate. So that's how we handled the whole production design and props part of it. The props part was also interesting because they had to seek out props that they either had to build it or they had to find period appropriate looking props. So that was quite the process doing the research for like the knife, for like the hay. How would hay be stacked? How would the walls look, and so the sheets, because they would use in the old days, we found out they would use sheets on hanging from the rafters just to break the wind when the wind comes in. So like those were like little details. Where would the ropes be? What pails would be there? So like those kind of things, and then even some of the the artifact of like the devil that you see, that's also like something that, oh, what would have been some kind of artifact that depicts evil at the time. So we would find that and mix that with our own aesthetic and say, okay, that looks appropriate enough. And same thing with the lanterns and all that. We had to like make sure that that's the kind of stuff that would have been there And by this was a lot of research figuring that out from my part and then from Allison and Sydney's part as well. So that's how we came up with the look of it. In terms of the costumes, our excellent costume designer, Bonnie Jean Tyre, she was able to, again, very little budget, and she was able to saying, okay, what is your aesthetic? And that's how I'm going to build it. Because we could do the like, like the Roman Catholic painting version, but I said no, we have to make it the Sergio Leone version, the rough and tumble, like almost just like what would it have been like? How much dust you would have, how much wear and tear the costumes would have to have. Yet we also wanted to make sure because it is a kind of colorful poppy movie as well, aesthetically at least, not subject matter wise, but we wanted the classical colors to still come out, like the maroons, the blues, the veil, the beige veil, so those and have like hint, color coordinated thematically, like Joseph is wearing like tinges of green, which for us would symbolize jealousy, so these were little like color coded things that we were throwing in to make sure that the balance between the production design, the costumes, and the cinematography were all this is very well worked between the three departments of the look. So how did we achieve this kind of like out there kind of very colorful poppy look with this budget was because of the numerous conversations between the three departments to make sure coordination wise we knew what we were doing, and it's very heavily storyboarded too, so that's another helpful part of it.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the issues of colors. Was colorization a challenge for a film, especially the fact that this being a horror film, you have to use certain lighting and shadows to progress the story.
Yes, we had to make a decision about that because we could do moonlight can be played in different ways. You can either play it as a blue moonlight. You can play it as like some sort of an ethereal green, like sort of like in the Guillermo del Toro movies, like Nightmare Alley, Shape of Water. They kind of have like a very green moonlight, or you play it as total blackness, total dark, like in The Witch.
Hmm.
So but we realized I would have ideally wanted it to be total dark, but I felt a little bit of that ethereal blueness needed to come through to kind of suggest that there is something else going on here. So even if it's realistic, there is an element of the surreal. So that's how my cinematographer Tommy Oshadak, who he is excellent. We it's me and him sit and kind of design the movie, even during the script phase. Like I'll send him various iterations of the script and be like, that works, that doesn't. He hates horror movies too. And he's a very prickly Jersey man, a very talented one too. So he says he calls me on my bullshit when it needs to be called out. So I'm very grateful for him for figuring out how to do the moonlight and make sure that it always comes off as realistic without being over the top.
Since this is a biblical horror movie, one of the things that is fascinating is the decision of the creature feature in this film. How do you end up settling the look for this creature?
So we looked at a lot of old paintings of Satan. Like we were like, okay, what are the different depictions of Satan that we could get to? And there were depictions where he was like a very handsome man, like a cast down angel. And then there was one, I forgot the painter, but it was very striking where he had a very gaunt face and almost like white, but very overtly like it's like a little too white, the eyes, but it looked like just a guy who could have just been hanging around. So I took that image and I said, but this is technically supposed to be a cast down angel. So if he's
Hmm.
been cast down into hell, he'd have been burnt. So he had to look like a burn victim as well. And also, I like the idea of that it could have just been a veiled person. Like, could it be Satan or could it be just some psychopath that's just standing in the desert? We wanted to play with that and just say like, it could be either. Even in the movie, we don't really say what that is. Is it a person? Is it a projection of Mary's guilt? Is it a projection of Joseph's jealousy? You know, or is it Satan? We don't know. Um, but so we had to play that fine line, but we had to give enough of each element into it. So it was almost like a little, like a mixed, a bowl, like a mixed bowl of all of these elements thrown together is how we came up with the look. Our special effects makeup artist, his name is Robert Bravo, another man who hates me unconditionally, but he's well, now we've done 4 films together, and I always give him, we don't have much of a budget, so he's always very annoyed when I tell him the budget, and yet he somehow finds a way to figure it out. So I'm also very, very grateful to him, and he tolerates a lot of my annoying personality points. So I'm very grateful for him for coming up with that look.
It sounds like you had a great crew for this film. Now, of course, short films tend to be, a gateway to feature films. Were there plans for more story of this? Because speaking to you, I mean, we don't know how you would actually handle linguistics for a feature film after this short film is actually done.
Yes, no, we've found now other ways of figuring it out. I mean, we'd probably go back to the same source if he allows us. And but no, he should, God willing. But the whole idea for this was to make a feature, so that we did this to prove that we could do a feature. Because the whole idea is, we were looking for financing for another film, which is a slightly bigger film, but that movie got a lot of attention. It was called My Scary Indian Wedding. That got a lot of attention, and we were getting good budgets, but we were never getting the budget that we need for it, because you can't call a movie My Scary Indian Wedding and set it all in the bathroom. There's no way. So we decided, I was like, can't we do a movie that's contained with like minimal characters, that has like an interesting appeal? And I have always had this story in the back of my head, the Nativity story as a haunted house movie. So when we were talking about it with one of my producer friends, he said, "What's the wackiest idea that you have that's very contained?" I said, "Nativity story told as a haunted house movie." He's like, "I want to see that, but I don't believe you could pull it off." Because I explained the whole Aramaic side, I explained the whole bringing the devil and all of this stuff into it, and playing on this religious horror that looks like it's going to be blasphemous, but it's also walking this fine line of reverence at the same time. And he said, "Go and do it." So this was in the middle of June of 2024, and we very quickly put it together. We shot by the end of August, and we had it ready by end of October. So just because we want to get to the feature. We are actually in the process of making the feature right now. We also wanted to let the short go around as many festivals as we can to just spread the word, so to speak. And that way I can also go and annoy all the other festival goers at the same time. And it's a good way of testing, honestly. It's a good way of testing how the audiences would react to a film like this. And so far, thank God, literally, that it's been a very positive response, way more positive than I would have imagined. I thought we'll get the whole, you know, maybe 30% would be into it, and, 70% like this is some absolute nonsense. But we're glad that we've been getting very positive response. Like people, like even it's strange. The more devout religious people are the ones who are more into it, which is even crazier. 'Cause I thought it'd be more like, they'd want to hate watch something like this. But fortunately, so far, that's not the case. But we'll see. We've still got time. It's still very, very early days in our run, but we've had some very, very positive screenings where people have been scared and they want to come and talk about the movie after. Lots of people have come in to, what does it mean? How do you come up with it? So we're very fortunate to have that kind of reaction so far. But we are leading into the production of the feature now.
Well, there's an audience for everything, and especially for a film like this. Ramon, I've taken a lot of time already, so I'm going to wrap it up with one last question because I could tell you're a horror aficionado, and there's always a debate between, visual effects and practical effects. And I want to say you are much more on the practical end. Tell us which side you're on and why.
I'm 100% on the practical side. I believe if I'm sure it'll happen eventually, but I don't feel like the CGI and the VFX has come to the point where the you feel the physical weight of the thing, of whatever you're trying to show, whether it's a giant like dinosaur or creature or whatever. Whereas if you have something there, like an animatronic or whatever that it is, like like in the thing when they have Rob Bottin does all these like crazy things. That's why those movies still stand out. Like even Jurassic Park, like some of the closer raptor stuff, all the animatronic stuff works on that. You then embellish, I mean, sorry, not embellish, you kind of add to that. You add to that with the VFX. That's how I feel like the best mix is because then you have the weight, you have something that the actors are actually reacting to and feeling. So they're not just because you can tell, I can tell at least. So when you're reacting to nothing. Whereas if you have something there it makes it tangible, and I feel like the audience feels it too. They won't probably be able to explain why they feel it or they don't feel it, but they are in subconsciously you can feel it for sure, no matter how good it is. So I feel like a good mix of the two is the way to go. We try to do it as practically as possible because it's also fun. Yes, it's very stressful, it is very time consuming, but I feel it's more fun. It makes the set, you feel the realism a lot more. Because even when people like say if the characters were playing the leads, they come and see the monster, they see the demon, they're scared. They immediately they're, oh shit, okay, I see it now. Like I see what I'm supposed to be afraid of. Whereas if we say we're gonna fix it in post and it's all a CGI monster the whole time, they if they come in and they're like they have a very standard look. It's like that, it's like it's a very I've seen it. I've seen them reacting to nothing, and it's almost like a very similar standard like gasp. Whereas, like, if there's something there, immediately it sinks in and it becomes realistic. So I feel from both an audience point of view and from an actor's point of view, it's much better to do some kind of practical effect, at least, no matter what you're doing.
Well said, Ramon. Ramon, thank you very much for speaking to us about Virgin, your short film, and I really do look forward for to you and making this into a feature film because this is a very unique story, and not to mention the unique style that you actually adapted, and can't wait to hopefully speak to you again about your future project.
I really appreciate you very much for having me on and taking the time to watch it and very insightfully dissect it with me. And I really appreciate that. And my whole team thanks you for that and for giving us the time for this.
Not a problem. Let's do this again next time. Thank you, Ramon. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.